Recording has started.
Yes, recording has started. Welcome everyone, and thank you again for joining the, I think, almost sixth talk series of the EVICT project. I'm chairing the session today, but the floor will soon be given to Michelle, Oren, and Rachelle Alterman. They will present a recent book chapter that I've written and published, and the chapter seems very interesting, so I'm really excited for their presentation because they analyzed several housing rights provisions across the world that are based in each constitution of the countries that they analyzed. And the purpose of the analysis that they did is to stimulate national discussion or cross-national discussion on the role of constitutional housing rights. And I hope that this presentation that they will given and the time that we have to discuss their presentation afterwards will start this cross-national discussion, because I can already see that there are a lot of different cultures and nationalities present here in this Blue Jeans meeting, so it's going to be very interesting. Michelle or Rachelle, who can I give the floor to?
Rachelle, of course.
Oh, Michelle. Okay, I'll open up. Michelle was my PhD student. It was a pleasure. You will see her brain. We have already had two papers, two book chapters. One with Porek, who is here. And Michelle has gone other ways. We also have a book contract. And if Michelle wants to, we'll actually make it. It's, I think, almost 4 years since the contract is there, and the publisher is still awaiting. Since then, there's been updates and some more thinking, so obviously the book will go beyond. This too is an update for the to the PhD data, and I give the floor to Michelle. I'll be to put in, to intervene if necessary with some insights or to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Rachelle. I want to thank Patrick and Michelle for being here and inviting us. Patrick, you've been following my career for some time, and it's a true honor to meet you again. Okay, Michelle, can we move the slide? Thank you.
Is it showing?
Not yet. Might be maybe a bit heavy. Yeah, okay. So I inserted this slide because I realized that most of the presentation has no images of human beings at all. Yeah, and we're speaking about legislation, and we'll be analyzing tests, but it's very important to keep in mind that we're talking about people's lives here. For those of you who are interested in hearing more about the background of the research and the story, you can look up the terms of habitation. There's a recorded YouTube presentation talking a bit about the human, the social story of inequalities, of aspirations, and hope. We can move to the next slide. Thank you. So as we speak about these values, hopes, and aspirations, and most research comes out from a very personal story or some event that has deeply touched us and motivates us to go further with this research. It occurred to me that it didn't seem very correct that at the international level we have a recognition of the human right to housing, and the fact in practice we find such huge disparities between different housing policies along countries. And it seems, since we're talking about values of different societies, it seemed to make sense to look at national constitutions as documents that express these values, of different countries, and then we look at the differences and similarities between constitutions all around the world. So we collected the entire set of national constitutions. So I jumped directly into the methodology. So we had 8 stages along the way. Michelle, you can click. There are a bit of animations in the presentation. Yeah, Michelle is helping me. Thank you so much. So we had different stages, collecting, building the theoretical framework, and later on collecting the national constitutions, and later on running the survey, content analysis, until we arrive into the findings. But we highlighted 3 questions. The first one looked on whether there are explicit references to housing rights and in which manners these housing rights have been incorporated into constitutions. The second question looked at which aspects of housing actually appear inside the constitutions from mostly explicit forms. I will later explain what I mean by that. And the third question compares, what the wording of these constitutional clauses with the parameters or the criteria that was framed by General Comment number 4 by the Commission of Social, Economic, and Cultural Rights. I am going to assume in this presentation that you are already familiar with this document. So we're not going to talk about these international covenants, but rather talk more about our work. And I did include a bit of detail about our methodology, because I think, as a research center that is running research, it must be interesting for you. So today we will be speaking about the third question. And Michelle, we can move to the next. Thank you. So definition of a constitution, of course, there are different definitions. We choose this definition by Young's that studies comparative law, because we are comparing constitutions. And definition says it's a set of rules of a legal system which regulate the government of a country, and in particular the nature and relationships of its constituent parts to one another, and the basic rights which its citizens have against it. We can move to the next. Thank you. Michelle, we can. Does it move? Thank you. So the first question that opens up about our methodology is whether constitutions can at all be compared. Can we use constitutions as our research population? So there are lots of claims that has been made against comparative constitutional law and against comparing constitution in general. They've said that they are misleading guides to actual practice, and the rules that are included in one constitution may not be included in a different constitution, and therefore it's a bit difficult to compare them. There's the issue of interpretation by courts. So if we look only at the wording of the constitution, we might not get the entire picture of its implementation. The Constitution says little about extra constitutional organizations and the political processes standing behind. So we look at the constitutional legislation as something that is aspirational, but it might not reflect the aspirations of the entire people, but only the ones in power. And the last claim that we highlight here is that many of the constitutions are not, the laws in the constitution are not actually implemented. They are suspended, they're dishonored. And we also have claims against them. So we do know that some parts of the constitutions are implemented or obeyed most of the time. And we do know, for example, that distinctions between constitutions are evident and indispensable for this study. So this is what we actually look at and try to understand also why such differences exist. Yeah, we can move to the next one. Thank you. Yeah, we can jump to the next one. So the collection of data. This took quite a long time. We're talking about, I think it started around the year 2011 or 2012. The sources of the constitutions were mostly governmental bodies. In these years, luckily, fortunately, governments already set their websites. Otherwise, it would have been much more difficult to find these documents. Yeah, we can move to the next slide. Thank you. You can click several times. It's there's an animation there. Thank you. Software, our platform was not very sophisticated. So Acrobat Pro, building a library where we could put all the documents together and highlight the designated articles with comments. Yeah, we can move to the next. And of course, organizing this entire the population of documents, of constitutions, a long time on a chronological line. So several versions of the constitutions have been drafted a long time. We have amendments. We also, at a certain point, I had to look back at older constitutions to find out whether the constitutional housing rights articles were new, or maybe they already existed in previous constitutions. The chronological factor was important in our research, and what you see here through the dots, the C dots, the blue ones, are the constitutions. You can see below on the x-axis the countries, different countries. Not all of them fit in this chart. And the other thing we looked at, which is relevant to the paper or the chapter we're presenting today, was how does these constitutions, or the time that the constitution was passed or amended, stand in relation to comment number 4 of the Commission on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Here we see on whether they were ratified or not ratified, but this is just to give you an image of how complex was this data collection, making order inside all this information before we run into the scanning of the actual constitutions. Yeah, we can move to the next slide. Thank you. And now I show you this. So in 2013, Constitute, which is a platform run by the University of Illinois, together with the Museum of Constitutions in the United States, and several other, Tom Ginsburg from Chicago University was also a collaborator. But somewhere when I was finishing to build up all the collection of these constitutions and, you know, trying to make chronological order in all this mess, this platform was released to the world. It started working on it in 2009. I'm showing here at the left side an email, an enthusiastic email I wrote my supervisor commenting about this wonder. If only we had it before, that would have made the research so much simpler. So today, basically, for those who are interested in looking at constitutions, you can look up the Constitute project, which was also, I don't know if it finally happened, but it was going to be purchased by Google. So we also missed an opportunity to make an exit. And you can actually look up the constitutions of the different countries. You can look by topics. So the different topics have been highlighted. You can look at the chronology and the very interesting patterns, which I think that they might follow in the next step of their project, is to look at the similarities between families and question whether there is some kind of code standing behind these constitutional documents. Yeah, we can move to the next one. Thank you. Yeah, you can press again. There's an animation. So the third stage, we surveyed 205 national constitutions, but only 189 of them were UN member states. And we move on looking only at the UN member state countries. Yeah, can click. The first stage of sorting, we looked, well, after reading the entire document of all the countries, this is also might be a benefit that I want to highlight, because there's Atlas, there are different softwares that are made for language analysis. And it was kind of important to read the constitutions first, because I enjoyed it a lot. It was interesting to learn about the biographies of the different countries and how they see themselves and the narratives, but also because the keywords that we found were very different. Yeah, so if I would have looked only for housing, I would have probably missed many articles on the way. And then after finding the articles, I have to sort them out in between articles that are explicit, that mention explicitly housing, and articles that mention housing as a secondary issue. Call them shopping lists, yeah. Citizens of X country have rights to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and among them housing appears, but this is not a clause that speaks specifically about housing. So this sorting of explicit housing rights, we publish it in Patrick's book. Yeah, we can move to the next, to those of you who are interested in looking at the sorting of classification, it's available there. At the very end, looking at, after we've collected all the clauses, trying to perhaps to map them down and minimize what kinds of clauses do we have, we found the following list. Yes, we can click them, I think, together. So first, recognizing housing as a right, protecting housing from abuse or deprivation, empowering private persons to defend their homes, establishing a duty of the state to create a housing plan or a housing policy or a housing fund, establishing a duty of the state to provide the means to achieve housing by supplementing private initiative, and establishing a duty of the state to provide housing or distribute public estates, either public or social housing. And the last one, obliging the state to assure access to housing by minorities, vulnerable or dependent people. Yeah, can move to. Thank you. So back in 2013, looking at the total number of constitutions that include explicit housing rights, we found 64 of them, 11 of them EU members. We have to, I later on present the European countries, that are not necessarily EU members. Yeah, we can move to the next slide. Thank you. And in 2020, we found that we have new members in the club. So 84 national constitutions, 2 countries removed the clauses. They drafted their revising their constitutions, and about 20 countries added clauses. Germany is an exception where they passed a temporary law that ended in 2019 and referred to issues of funding of social housing. Yeah, we can move to the next. So just examples for those of you who are not familiar with this kind of clauses. These are new clauses that have been inserted since 2013 in the last years. So this is Côte d'Ivoire from 2016. The state promotes the access of citizens to housing under the conditions prescribed by law, and the state promotes access to citizens' employment. So this is a different subject that has been inserted. So this is an example. What we look at is the wording, the expressions, the adjectives used, and the actual meaning, yeah, of the clause. On a different paper, we looked, for example, at the entitlements. What kind of entitlements they give, and who are the deserving people inside the clause. So here we see, for example, citizens are mentioned, but there is a diversity in the wording used among constitutions. Yeah, Michelle, we can move to the next one. So I will be showing a few examples just so that you understand what how much meat there's inside these clauses that we can actually try to sort and understand. So the state, this is from Cuba, National Constitution, 2019, a very recent constitution. The state recognizes the right to adequate housing and safe and healthy home for all people. The state works to make this right effective through shelter construction programs with the participation of entities and of the population in correspondence with public policies, the norms of territorial and urban order, and the laws. Yeah, we can move to the next one. I have about another 2 or 3 examples. Yeah, so this is a clause from Morocco, National Constitution 2011. I will not read all of it, but you can see that the state, the public establishment and territorial collectivities work for the mobilization of means. And then this is an example of a shopping list. Among the clauses we see down below, to decent housing. I did not highlight it, but you can see it among the shortest phrase. Yeah, we can move to the next one. Maldives National Constitution 2008. This is an older one. Every citizen has the following rights pursuant to this constitution, and the state undertakes to achieve the progressive realization of these rights by reasonable measures within its ability and resources. And you can see B, clothing and housing. This is a clause that is easy to not to spot. Unless you're working with software, then it would work perfectly. Yeah, we can move to the next one. Zimbabwe, I think it's the last one, 2017. Sorry for the switching of the numbers. The state and all institutions and agencies of government at every level must take reasonable legislative and other measures between the limits of the resources available to them to enable every person to have access to adequate housing. So we see, I think, as a general pattern that most of the clauses here are aspirational and most probably not justiciable. Yeah, we can move to the next one. And another big question that arises around the vagueness of the adjectives used in the different articles. So we found decent housing, adequate housing, proper housing, suitable dwelling, and sufficient living accommodation. This is also a topic that that gained our attention. Yeah, we can move to the next one. Thank you. So overall, we gathered about 50 criteria for analysis and evaluation. We ended up with a huge Excel spread all over the room. And I'm making fun of this because today we have much more progressive tools to deal, and it's amazing how in such a short period of time technology has evolved so much. Yeah. Today, we would be able to do this entirely differently. Yeah, we can move to the next one. Yeah, so this is just an example for those of you who were there in Lisboa back in 2015. So yeah, we can click. There's an animation thing. So for example, one of the papers presented, suggesting there might be a pattern, yeah, in the code between constitutions dealt with housing eligibility. Yeah, we can move to the next. And today we're going to speak about the extent in which constitutional housing rights are reflected. Reflect the criteria established by general comment number 4 on the right to adequate housing. Yeah, can move to the next. So yeah, just to give a general frame, comment number 4 was published in 1991. It's the most widely recognized interpretation of the right to adequate housing. And within this document, several, yeah, there's a discussion or development of the concept of adequate. And the comment also establishes 7 criteria according to which, yeah, or maybe to help the global community try to understand what adequate housing could possibly mean. Yeah, we will see in terms of what. Yeah, we can move to the next one. So the first criteria is about legal security of tenure. In general terms, security, confidence in the legal system, and lack of worry about loss of rights. Tenure, it's marked in the inside the square. Tenure applies to various contexts, so rental, cooperative, lease, owner, occupation, emergency housing, and informal settlements, including occupation of land and property. So basically, we look at these terms, and we try to find out whether the constitutional clauses address any of this terminology, and according of that, we do the sorting. I'm just reminding you, and I know it's a bit hard for maybe for lawyers who are used to look at the interpretation, to look only at the wording without trying to find out what's standing behind that. But this is a language analysis, so this is what we do here. Yeah, we can move to the next one. Availability of services, materials, and infrastructure. So I'm going down to the square. An adequate house must contain certain facilities essential for health, security, comfort, and nutrition. All beneficiaries of the right to adequate housing should have sustainable access to natural and common resources, safe drinking water, energy for cooking, heating and lighting, sanitation and washing facilities, means for food storage, refusal, disposal sites, drainage, and emergency services. Again, we try to look up inside of the constitutional clauses and find out on whether some of these subjects are addressed and anchored as aspirations in the different countries. We can move to the next one. So,
Rachelle, I'm not sure that it's clear that these are just examples drawn from a given constitution. These are not representative texts. There's examples of a particular constitution that addressed affordability.
No. These are the aspects. Okay, I will jump on. So there's affordability concerned with securing giving standards of housing at the price of rent, in which does not impose an unreasonable burden on housing income. Yeah, we can move to the next one. I'll pass through them fast. Habitability. Yeah, we can move to the next one. Accessibility and location. Cultural adequacy is the last one. Yeah, so can move to the next one. So we have a Christmas tree. So these are the seven criteria: tenure, services and infrastructure, affordability, habitability, accessibility, location, and cultural adequacy. Between each of the criteria, we have sub-criteria, specific wording that we're looking for, whether constitutions address these specific aspects. For example, in tenure, so there's rental, ownership, public housing, cooperative housing, protection, for example, for forced eviction, and homelessness. And so it goes on with service and infrastructure. Within affordability, we have a variety of terms between habitability and all other aspects, as you may see here. Yeah, we can move to the next one. So overall, we found there's a wide geographical distribution among the 84 countries. We have 20 countries in the Americas, 16 in Europe, 24 in Asia, and 24 in Africa. South America still have the largest concentration of countries with constitutional rights to housing. Yeah, move to the next. So we also found, looking at the clauses, so we had 84 constitutions, I think about 123 clauses, because some constitutions have more than one article. But we found that 90% of them do not address any kind of component of criteria of housing. So you can imagine the clause will say every citizen has a right to housing, period. But the majority, 81, actually address one or more of these different criteria. We found the largest, the most highly mentioned criteria among those 7 criteria was the legal security of tenure, that we found in 48% of the constitutions. And then subjects like location, for example, that we know that is very important for housing today, only appears in 80% of the constitutions. Or affordability, for example, 31% of the constitution speak about this term. Yeah, we can move to the next slide. Thank you. And here we see the different countries. So it's divided by continents. There's another slide with additional continents. You see here the numbers from 0 to 7. It's the amount of criteria that are mentioned by each of the clauses. They're not in order according to the to the criteria, to the specific criteria. This is a cumulative analysis. So if we look, maybe Michelle, can we move back to the previous slide? So we can see, for example, in Europe, that Portugal has the most detailed article that contains all 7 criteria are mentioned. But on the other hand, the legislation, the original legislation dates from 1974. Yeah, although it was revised in 2005, the clause actually existed before comment number 4 was published. So we cannot infer any kind of relation on that. And same happens with the other clauses. Another leading country with the number of criteria mentioned is Switzerland. In Asia, we see the Philippines and Iran. Yeah, we can move to the next one. Countries in the Americas attained the highest score, ranging from 1 to 7, led by Venezuela, Ecuador, Mexico, Bolivia, and Brazil. And we see in Africa, the leading Egypt, Kenya, Gambia, Angola, and Cape Verde, with 3 criteria out of 7. Yeah, we can move to the next. Now, when we speak about security of tenure, so it was also interesting try to understand, within this clustering, what kind of aspects are mentioned in the Constitution. The most highly mentioned subjects were social and public housing. 23 constitutions speak or mention public housing. You can see in the findings column a bit more detail about what kind of content we can find there. So, for example, in social public housing, the state shall adopt necessary measures for the provision of housing and distribution of public estates, or to promote housing projects of social interest. And then we have ownership, which is also quite often mentioned in 17 out of the 84 constitutions. Ownership means either enabling the greatest possible number of citizens to become homeowners, create a system for housing ownership that is compatible with income, establish a financing system enabling cheap credit to be granted sufficient to become owners of housing, supporting activities aimed at acquisition of a home by each citizen, or encouraging the construction of housing and the acquisition and ownership of apartments and houses for the personal use of private individuals. You can also see aspects that are less commonly mentioned. For example, homelessness only appears in 3 constitutions from the entire set of the world constitutions. Then we have caregiving institutions only in 3, protection against abuse in tenancy matters, and protection from deprivation also appears on 7 constitutions. Informal settlements are actually mentioned, which is quite interesting. In a constitution to speak about informality. It appears in 3 constitutions, and nomadism appears in the Constitution of Afghanistan, improve the living conditions of nomads' livelihood. Yeah, can move to the next. So concluding, we found a significant presence of constitutions, 84 out of 189. Still, many countries and groups of countries have not yet merit in incorporating housing rights into their constitutions. On the positive side, so we did see a general increase in the number of constitutions. And we do assume that looking at the countries that have recently legislated new constitutions incorporating housing rights, that some of them were accompanied in the process by international bodies like UNDP, for example. So we may assume that there is a relation on this international intervention in the fact that human rights have been incorporated into such documents. Yeah, we can move to the next one. So the findings showed that the insertion of constitutional rights to housing component, later to be known as UN housing criteria, overall we observed an increase since 1991 in the number of constitutions incorporated. So looking at the chronological aspect, we saw that before 1991, only 31 had this kind of provisions, and post 1991, we found that 56 constitutions included such criteria. Between 2011 to 2020, 20 countries have drafted new constitutions, including constitutional rights to housing. So we saw the list of new countries. Yeah, we can move to the next one. Thank you. We also found major disparities across countries in the number of criteria that were addressed inside the clauses. And we conclude, yeah, according to our findings, that there's not enough effort by international bodies, civil society, and scholars in attempting to reach a greater consensus on the importance of housing rights. And another dynamic that we find interesting is that maybe steering this, the implementation of human rights through constitutions is not so effective, and the international community is reaching out for new instruments. So we have the SDG, which is basically a strategic plan, a goal-motivated strategic plan, which is pushing countries toward the implementation of these rights without the necessity of legislating them in their aspirational documents. Yeah, we can move to the next one. We think that rights are likely to remain important in the globalized world. At the same time, our mixed news finding may represent an alert about deeper issues underlying ideologies and geopolitics. And our findings comply with previous arguments by Patrick on major obstacles hindering the adoption of international human rights by national laws. I think this is the last one. So we're basically inviting, calling for more systematic comparative research, and at the same time, more country-specific analysis is needed. So if we look at the list, for example, the list of new countries that have incorporated housing rights, it would be extremely interesting to dive in and try to understand the context in which they have included these laws. Okay, I think can move to the next. Yeah, so having presented parts of this late chapter, I want also to wish you season greetings. Yeah, so we're approaching Christmas for those who celebrate, and want to thank you. I think this is the last slide, right?
One final slide about the book, but it's hampered. There it is.
Yeah. I don't know if Sandeep has joined us.
Yeah, I think it might be best to just for now open up the discussion, see if whether there are questions, and then the editor of the book can have the last like 1 or 2 minutes to to talk about the book, but for now I will close the presentation so everyone can see each other. I think that's, yeah, okay, great.
I just need to make a correction. Of course, I hope everybody noticed that I made a mistake. My mind lapsed to another part of the research, and I confused the criteria, the detailed criteria in the UN note to the quotations that we had from different constitutions. But Michelle went on, and that was excellent.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Michelle, for this very, very interesting presentation and an even more impressive work of research. Incredibly impressive work and very useful and very interesting. I have some questions, but I will first open up the room for discussion to everyone else. Are there people with questions or comments? Yes, Patrick.
Yes, hello Michelle, hello Rachelle. It's lovely to see you. It's still a fascinating piece of work. It's still one of the most fascinating pieces of work on the right to housing that I've seen. Nobody else is actually looking at this. So you're really the leaders here. It's also very important because we're now talking about putting the right to housing in the Irish Constitution. And so your book is going to be well read here in the next, when it comes out, we'll be all reading it. But congratulations. Can I ask one simple question? I'm just wondering, what do you see are the trends? Do you see more rights to housing coming into the constitutions or less, or are they becoming more specific? Just what is the trend you've noticed?
Should I answer? Or, yeah. Thank you, Patrick. I also want to say hi to Jane. I just see you for the first time, and I'm so happy to see you here. Yeah. So the general trend that we see is an increase, but increase in the countries that suffer the most from inequalities. So there is a tendency, and again, this has to be looked at because I don't know who's driving. These countries are also the countries that receive most assistance from international bodies, with their steering committees, with their elections, with the legislation of constitution. South Sudan, almost the entire constitution was drafted by international bodies. So we also suspect that it reflects actually something else. It reflects international intervention rather than the actual, aims, wishes, hopes of the people, which is what the Constitution should actually reflect in reality.
Very good.
Michelle, perhaps you should also add a bit about our findings about East Europe, the collapse of communism. Did it lead to constitutional rights?
Yeah, so we found it did not. So looking at in 1991, so we have the third wave of democratization and lots of new countries emerge. And we were hoping actually to find among these countries a large number and coming from a Soviet background, hoping to find this kind of clause in the constitution, and we didn't find it in such a. I think it was something. This is not in this paper; it's in a previous one, but I think found something like 30% of the countries that introduce housing rights. So yeah, it's interesting also to look at the let's call it blocks of countries. So yeah, one of the things we looked at the very beginning, trying to explain why some countries have constitutional housing rights and others don't, was looking at the inequalities, at we used different international indicators the Human Development Index, try to understand if it's the most needy countries, the most disparate countries, the most maybe the communist countries, the grants of democratic countries. So looking at different criteria, and we found that the only one that would actually explain is the legal system, because some countries, especially countries from civil law tradition, tend to legislate, and sometimes very extensive documents where their entire aspirations are coming into writing. And on the contrary, we see countries from common law traditions that have very few articles, that are very general, and they rely mostly on case law and interpretation. So legal traditions and also cultural families. So we found a lot of housing rights in countries that are Spanish speaking and Portuguese speaking. There, Portuguese country, Angola and Portugal. We see lots of similarities in Brazil, yeah, different continents, but still the wording is very similar, the extent is very similar. So this dynamic is also very interesting. So we look at how different countries actually copied or borrowed articles from countries that have entirely different contexts. We see the same clause, totally different reality, totally different implementation. Yeah, and I look all the time at the Constitute project also, because they're looking at it not only in terms of housing, but they look at the entire set. So we're talking about big data and and AI and things that Michelle has been starting to work on, which is very, very exciting. So when we look at the larger phenomena, constitutional housing rights is just one article out of many. But there are very interesting dynamics that also influence this. So it's not only if the people believe or not that there should be such clause, but there are stronger forces that are steering this legislation.
Yes, definitely. And well, you already talked about it, the EVICT project and AI and law. Michelle, you raised your hand. Can you now raise your voice?
Yes, I can. Thanks so much. First of all, Rachelle and Michelle, thanks so much for this wonderful paper. And I'm really looking forward to see it in the actual book. I already read the PDF online, so you can find it online. But I'd love to see and know more about the book. So I think that's
There's no PDF. There's no PDF of the book online.
Yeah, I found it. I think so. Not of the book, but from your chapter. It's not exactly. So I read the preprint of the chapter, and it's fascinating. So I can recommend doing it. But I have two questions. So what about your database? Is it open access? Because it would be great to run some analysis on that. I can understand why you don't want to put it open access, because you still want to publish the book. But so that's my that's my first question. And maybe to save time, my second question is: this data set doesn't say anything about effectiveness of the right to housing, right? So that's what you acknowledge. But I see opportunities to maybe combine it with other databases. So are you planning to do that? And I'm thinking about like the work of Michael Kolocek from Germany, who Rachelle knows very well. I guess he was in his committee supervisor that looked in his thesis. But also, and I put it now in the chat, there is also a very interesting other German scholar.
Michelle? Whom are you talking about?
Michael, David's student.
Yeah.
So it's David. Yes, of course. I was his examiner.
Yeah. So he did some work on like the effectiveness of the right to housing by looking at the country.
Yeah.
And then I've also added a paper in the chat of Konstantin Kolodin, who did some quantitative work on rent control. So if we combine this, maybe we can make like a ranking of countries that are actually doing great and also recognize the right to housing or not. So are you thinking about doing that? And if not, can other people then use your database to do this?
The story of the database is painful and sad, an awful amount of work. And as soon as I finished reading these documents, and this is also on the email I pasted during the presentation, I needed to find a host. I said, I mean, there was a website that belonging to a university where there were a few constitutions. They were starting to collect there to make them available to students. But I quickly noticed they were not updated. My technique was to look at the Constitution of Angola 2010. If I saw it was there, I knew it was updated. If it wasn't there, I knew it wasn't. And I wrote them. And I offered them the collection. And the person who was in charge told me they stopped the project, but they knew there was a project going on somewhere else, but they didn't give me the details. And I was looking, I mean, we're at the Technion, it's a technological university, there's no law school. It didn't make sense to put it somewhere in our university's website. And the one who did host the collection was Ben Davey. They had a group called Floor. I don't know if it still exists, but right. we actually placed all the constitutions there. We made them available. But Floor is also a forum that deals mostly with questions about space and planning, and also legal aspects of planning.
Oh, but citizenship. It's focused on citizenship.
So it never became too popular. And then when I found out about the Constitute project that was taking place, it was a huge, I felt like I missed the opportunity to make something big out of this collection. And of course, big data would be huge. So think about all this. I mean, we could look at law as some kind of genetic code of nations, of communities, so looking. If I had better tools back at the time, I could have saved a lot of time, and I could have found lots of relations, also in terms of chronology and mapping down all the genealogy of the constitutions and the clauses and the relations. There's so much we can learn out of this data, and I agree. I agree completely that gathering the findings of different researchers under this kind of machine learning could actually provide us as humanity a better understanding of our legal mind, our world of contract works. So I think definitely it's a very, very exciting project. I wish I had the budget, the funding to do something else out of this. And also, well, I'm very excited with technology these days, but I've chosen a slightly different path. So I'm working today more on the smart cities realm and more deep into planning and less into housing and constitutional rights. So I haven't made much progress with the cases taking this to the next level. But I certainly think this is interesting, and of course I am willing to collaborate with the data. We do have still lots of findings in the research and lots of updates and big questions about the future of housing and how to where are we going with this. That will be hopefully published in the book. But I think completely, unrelated. And obviously, I'm willing to collaborate, and give this data.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that a lot of people want to comment on this or have a question, but we also promised the editor of the book to have a few minutes, and we're already running a little bit out of time. There are also some people who put some questions in the chat. I'm very sorry that we don't have time to address these questions, but we have these talks on a monthly basis, so maybe we can open up their next discussion, because everything is basically about the right to housing, so we can always continue this discussion after another talk series. I also had a question about maybe linking this to countries, looking at whether these countries have a constitutional court or if that has any impact on the effect of the right to housing, but let's leave that also for a discussion in another session. The editor, he's here. Is it Sandeep? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Michelle and Rachelle, for such a wonderful presentation, inviting me to this session, and session organizers for accommodating me. I will not take much of your time. Just a few words about the book, and you see the slide up there. The book is titled Rights in the City, Problems, Progress, and Practice, in which Michelle and Rachelle's chapters will be published. So book will be out most likely in the middle of the next year. The best part about the book is that it'll be available in an open access format. So you don't have to pay for it unless, of course, you wish to get a paper copy. Just again, very quickly about what the book entails. Some of it has come out of my own work on human rights here in Canada. But essentially what a book does is it takes stock of the rights struggles and the progress made with respect to rights, with a primary focus on Canadian cities. So it examines the legal, conceptual, philosophical aspects of rights, various forms of rights, human rights, indigenous rights, housing rights, property rights, and such. And in terms of the exact question that sort of unifies all different parts of the book, and that question is, what is and what ought to be the role of municipal governments and urban planners in regulating, implementing, and advocating rights claims? And it tries to answer the question through empirical ways, via legal research, and analysis of statutory and case law, and also some qualitative case studies. So there are several chapters, about 9 of them. Few of them are written by me. One of them is by Michelle and Rachelle. And essentially what binds the chapters together is the fact that they're all about rights and rights struggles, and then make the case that cities are becoming the new frontiers of rights-based human development, social justice, and policy innovation. But this journey is full of struggles, ethical, moral dilemmas, and some trade-offs. So I hope you will find the book interesting when it comes out, and perhaps as interesting as Michelle and Rachelle's presentation was. So I'll stop at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And thank you especially, Michelle and Rachel, for this very interesting research and this very interesting presentation. And it's great that it's now published in a book, so we can all read it and access it and use it. And I really hope somehow that we can combine indeed your database and the database that we are building with the EVICT project. Michelle Vos, do you want to add some final words before we end the session?
No, I think it was an excellent session. So thanks again, Sandeep. Many thanks, Michelle, Rachel, also others for joining us. So this is the last session of the EVICT Talks this year, but next year we will perform on title. I think it's Soda. Can you mute yourself? Right, so thanks so much again. Yeah. So thanks so much again. Next year we will have in January or in February we will have a next talk, EVICT talk by Professor Marius Pietersen from South Africa, who will talk about the right to housing and the right to the city. For now, just happy holidays. Enjoy your holiday, and see you next year. Thanks again.
Bye bye, everyone.